Well, Chris, glad to have you on.
Oh, it's good to be here.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're very experienced in this area
I
of
yeah,
podcasting.
I wouldn't say very experienced. I've got my own little podcast, and
Little.
we've done we've been doing it for 4 years, a little over 4 years now, and um we've done I think about 130, I think 38-ish episodes is where we're at. I did one a week for a year, and then since then we've been doing every other week.
It's a little bit more maintainable,
It is, yeah,
manageable.
it's more maintainable.
So
Yeah.
so tell us about you. What do you do other than the podcast? I mean, obviously it ties in, but
I do a lot of things in the trucking industry. So maybe I'll give you a little bit of a background, kind of tell you how it all kind of got
yeah.
started.
Yeah.
I right out of college worked for Flying J. The corporate headquarters are in the Ogden, Utah area, and um, worked for them for 5 years, and that kind of got me into the trucking industry. And then had a chance after about 5 years to buy my own company. Bought a company with my dad called Progressive Reporting Agency at the time, and they focused on helping commercial trucking companies or trucking companies with commercial trucks register their trucks and do their fuel tax reporting. And fuel tax reporting is something commercial trucks that travel interstate have to do every quarter. And then the vehicle registrations, registering commercial trucks is, when it's for interstate, is a lot more complicated than it is like when you and I go register our cars. That you actually pay registration fees in every state that you run through, and so it gets a little complicated. Most people don't want to tackle that themselves, so bought the company that did that, and then have just morphed it into something completely different. Now we still provide those two services, but they're maybe 10 or 15% of what we do. We help truck drivers that want to start their own business kind of go through the whole startup process, getting compliance with the DOT regulations, help them with a lot of kind of ancillary back end office stuff that they usually either don't have the experience doing or don't want to do it themselves. It makes more sense to outsource it to us, and we handle it for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
That's what got it all started.
Yeah. And you got into Flying J out of college.
Right out of
Is that
college. Yeah.
what you said?
So I went to Weber State, which is essentially like across the street from Flying J. They were like almost right next door
Oh,
to each
really?
other. And yeah, I was actually looking for an internship my last semester at college, and got hired on there and stayed there for 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's crazy how that happens
It is.
and can set your life in it. So you didn't imagine getting into trucking
No,
at some point.
no. My family really didn't have any background in trucking. My dad, he's my younger years in life was in the Army, active duty, so he moved all over the place. My grandparents, one of them owned the farm, and one of them was just a little general contractor that did mostly remodel stuff. So, and I spent a lot of the time growing up in the summers. I'd live with my grandparents and work on the farm.
Oh, yeah.
So that was fun.
That's some fun work there.
Yeah, I loved it.
I've had a lot of time spent on a farm, and it almost makes me wish I grew up on one. I kind of worked with friends, and it kind of was a part-time job after my full-time job doing concrete. So it was kind of a lot of work, but I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I think working on the farms really, had a big impact on my life, and taught me how to work, and it was a good thing.
Yeah. So when did you? So your dad served in the Army.
Yep.
You served in the Army, right?
I actually still am. Yeah, I right out of high school got in the National Guard. Still do that. So it's my part time. It's kind of like a hobby, honestly, and it's a part time thing. I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
Yeah, I can imagine. How much of an impact did that have on your businesses? Because I know, I mean, I know a lot of people that go through the Army and afterwards they seem to be very successful in business.
I would say it's had a huge impact for a lot of different reasons, and I've noticed the same thing, and I've put a lot of thought into why is that? Why do people that have a military background, why are they typically good in business? And I think it's a couple big things. One, military teaches you a lot of discipline, teaches you also to work hard. But then I think another one of the big things is people in the military are really good at developing and following systems, and which is a key element to really being successful in business is you develop, systems within your business, follow those systems. In the military, we call them SOPs, standard operating procedures.
Yep.
Military people are typically really good at making and following those. And that's one of the things that can really lead to success in a business.
Yeah. Well, for sure. That's a lot of things that kills businesses is there's haphazard, misdirection, like no order. And yeah, I just noticed there's a lot of people that have been in the military that are business owners.
Yeah. For
sure. When did you, how long were you out? Didn't you say you got deployed?
I did. So about a year and a half after my dad and I bought that first business, he was just a silent partner. He owned a heating and air conditioning company. And he didn't know anything about the trucking industry, but
Yeah.
I got deployed about a year and a half into it. And, he kind of came in, he'd actually sold his business about 6 months before that happened, kind of retired, and then came back out of retirement, kind of like, the athlete guys,
Yeah.
take a year off. Like, I don't like that.
Yeah.
So he came and worked, in the business, kind of helped oversee. We had a few employees at that point, kind of helped oversee them and did a lot of the kind of the bookkeeping and some of the administrative tasks of the business while I was gone. But that's another one of the things that really had a huge impact on me, kind of my philosophy in the business. Because once that happened, I realized, you know what, I can't operate a business. I can't be the day-to-day person in the business. Like if I am the day-to-day person, I get deployed, or, every year I have to go to my annual training. And as I've been in the military longer, those requirements and time away from my business gets bigger and bigger. And so I had to be really deliberate about how I ran the businesses. And so I ended up, I've got several businesses now at this point. They all have either a partner or somebody just super strong managing it. And I mostly just focus on like strategy, long-term perspective. I do a lot of, I kind of oversee a lot of times the sales side of things.
Yeah.
But the deployment really kind of helped me realize, okay, I got to do that. And so when I got home from the deployment, I was already, it's kind of funny because, those key employees that I had would say, like, as I was kind of trying to transition out, getting ready for the deployment, like, everybody, all the customers have a Chris addiction. They only think Chris can help them with the business. And, and so, but that deployment forced that kind of to sever that relationship.
Well, people are always talking, and not everybody in their business actually wants to do that, but there are a lot of people that do, and they just they can't, or they don't ever take the leap. So it's pretty interesting being forced into it at that point.
So then at that point, like when I got home, at that point, everybody else, the clients had an addiction on other people, and they didn't want to do it. Like, who's this Chris guy? Like he doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. So, it allowed me at that point to really focus on the business instead of working so much in the business. And so then at that point, we kind of expanded, started a few other businesses. And it's really grown. Like that first year, it was just me and one other employee. A little bit before I deployed, we'd hired 2 other employees, and they're still, I mean, this is, let's see, 13 years ago. Yeah, 13 years ago. And 11 years ago. And those 2 key employees are still with us in that business. They've been with us for a long time at this point, and they've kind of just maintained the operational side of things, and I kind of keep growing it, and it's been a good thing.
Yeah.
And we've got, between all the businesses, 80-ish employees now, and so it's seen some pretty crazy wild times. It's been fun.
Yeah.
It's been a ride.
Yeah. Well, so I imagine you weren't very involved at all when you were deployed. I mean, how did that even look like when you were?
I really wasn't deployed at all. So luckily, if I didn't have my dad, it would have been
Just
probably much more nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
So he didn't know anything about trucking, but those other 2 employees had really learned a lot over time. And he was there as a support and to help them and everything. And so it actually ended up working really well. The company actually grew a little bit while I was gone and was healthy when I got back. And I was able to just kind of jump in and focus on, okay, what can we do to continue to grow? And so one of the things I preach to people all the time is you've got to spend time working on your business, not just in your business. And that allowed me more than anything to like get to the point where I was working almost all on the business and not as much in the day-to-day
in the
of
day-to-day.
things.
And so you had said, you told me once that you started a business so the first one was helping truckers get started, right?
Mm-hmm.
And financed.
Yeah. Yeah. So we help some with some finance stuff is one. We also do like we've got a bookkeeping, accounting firm, a fuel card that we sell to clients that kind of help negotiate better fuel pricing for our clients. But then also started the trucking company, and that's really what morphed into the podcast. I kind of over time, I had seen a lot of clients come in the door and they'd be, some of them be super successful and some of them wouldn't be successful. And a lot of times, kind of like what you were talking about earlier, people just don't know those, they don't know how to operate a business. So a lot of the clients just didn't have that experience. They'd driven a truck, they knew how to get a load from point A to point B, all the mechanics that goes behind that, but they'd never seen behind the curtain of how to actually run the business. And so I thought the best way to teach people to kind of how to do that, help them be more successful, was to go start my own trucking company. So I'd been in the industry at that point, almost 10 years, well, more than 10 years. And I'd never driven a truck. I didn't have a CDL. So I had to go out and get a CDL. And I spent a year over the road trucking, 20 to 25 days a month away from home, all over the country, driving the truck and doing the podcast and kind of documenting the whole process, the startup phase, that first year of operation. And obviously still continue to do that. And the podcast just really focuses on good business practices.
Good business practices for truckers.
Yeah.
Trucking.
Honestly, 90% of it's applicable to just about
everybody,
business, but it's focused on the trucking industry and the Hauling Assets, which is the name of our trucking company. That's the name of the podcast too, Hauling Assets. It's it's there to kind of help people see the inside of a business. And we actually complete open book. We show the profit and loss statements. We show everything with the trucking company, the good, bad, the ugly.
That's something that I don't think I've seen before. I'm not sure. I haven't seen somebody start a business and document on a podcast. Have you?
There's a few others out there that I've seen
that are pretty similar, maybe different
industries. Yeah.
Different industries. Mm-hmm. That's a cool pod.
I don't think too many have taken it as. I mean, we're in our 5th year of doing it.
Yeah.
So we've been doing it for quite a while. I'm not sure too many have gone that long doing it.
Yeah. Well, I'd imagine people get sick of it.
Yeah.
Sick of the podcast, at least,
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, there's you hear podcasters talk about podcast fatigue, and that's a real thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can be daunting. And that's part of the reason I went to like every other week instead of trying to produce a podcast every week.
Yeah. No, it's a lot of work. It's even when I started this, I don't think I knew exactly how much work was going to be involved. Been able to, but it's really been pretty stressful. I guess I should say it's stressful. And there's been quite a few times, because I do one solo episode and one interview. And I think I've had 3 times now where I have 2 solo episodes in a row, because I have multiple people scheduled, and then I've got, people rescheduling and just don't hit dates, but I don't want to miss an episode. So there's just all sorts of problems that come along with it. And I never expected, this much work.
Yeah.
But so you knew all of the business side going into the trucking. How weird was it to take on like getting the CDL and learning kind of the workings of the day-to-day? Because I imagine that would be pretty stressful.
It's kind of interesting, because it's one of those things, you just don't know what you don't know, right?
And
like I remember, so I go to a school to get my CDL, and those schools are typically broken into two segments. There's a classroom portion, then the driving portion. And the classroom portion, most of it is um, compliance and the rules that you got to follow and the regulations. Well, like I not toot my own horn, but like I knew that piece better than the instructor did.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I've lived that,
yeah,
for a long time in like just minute detail. So all I really needed was a driving piece. And you go out and you figure, like like I said, I'd grown up on a farm. Like I was pretty competent at back in a trailer
yeah,
and driving heavy equipment and everything. And so, that part wasn't too hard for me, and I got it. And so after I got it, let's talk about my very first load.
yeah,
That was a interesting experience. So I had a dispatcher that would help us find loads.
yeah,
Used a third party dispatcher, and he'd driven a truck, so he knew everything. And so he had to walk me through a lot of things. It's kind of funny that my very first load was a load of yogurt out of Salt Lake, and so I go to pick it up. It's like a 1 o'clock in the morning appointment to pick it up.
oh wow,
Well, they weren't ready. So I'm there at 1 o'clock in the morning to pick it up, and the load wasn't ready. I didn't end up leaving till like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And so it kind of turned into a little bit of a
okay,
mess. And it was a load that was going down to Texas. When you go, you leave the Salt Lake area and you go to Texas, you go through Spanish Fork Canyon, which is one of the most dangerous canyons in
yeah,
the country. And so I've got to, drive my very first time with a loaded semi. In the school year, you're not loaded,
yeah,
and you don't go up and down hills. You
yeah,
don't use you don't use the engine brake, really. You don't
yeah,
do any of that kind of stuff. And the other thing, like when you go and you pick up a load from a warehouse, typically you back up to the door, and when the forklifts drive onto the truck, it can cause a truck to dip a lot. And so to prevent that from happening, or the trailer, you can slide the back four wheels of the semi will actually slide about 20 plus feet. Well,
wow,
probably about 20 feet.
I didn't know that.
And so you slide them all the way to the back, so there's not nearly as much of a dip when the forklift drives on. And then you use that sliding to adjust and balance the weight of the load. You can determine essentially how much weight goes on those four trailer tires versus how much of it goes on the drive tires of the truck. And so I'd never done that. And I didn't even at that point know you could do that. And so I'm backing up there, and the people are telling me, okay, you got to slide your tandems to the back. I'm like, what the
You're
heck
like,
are they
what?
talking about? And so I had to call my dispatcher. I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to slide the tandem. He's like, oh yeah, here's how you do it. So he like walks me through how to slide them to the back, which is you basically just release some pins. It's all pneumatic. You pull a lever, it releases some pins on the slide mechanism. You have the brakes on the trailer tires set, and just pull forward, and then it essentially
Oh,
just pulls everything to the back. I get all loaded, and then you've got to adjust them. You use that to adjust the weight,
yeah,
where
yeah,
it goes. And he had to kind of walk me through, okay, here's roughly where you want to be driving. It wasn't too heavy of a load. So if it's a really heavy load, you kind of have to, get it where you think it's supposed to be, drive to a scale, weigh it, make sure you don't have too much weight on each one of those axles. And then, so he walks me through that whole hoopla. And like, there was just a bunch of things like that where like I'd never worked for another company.
yeah,
So most drivers at that point, they're good drivers. They know what they're
yeah,
doing there. I hadn't. So like
yeah.
I had to learn a lot. And Jake like had to walk me through like using the engine brake, driving down the Spanish Fork Canyon,
Oh
making
wow,
sure I'm not going to kill myself, and like
yeah,
kind of what the rules of thumb of what gear you want to be in. And so it was an adventure,
yeah. Well, and a whole year of it.
and a whole year of it. Yeah.
Wow.
And then also on the way back, I went down to Texas and just came back to Utah. On the way back, between Monticello and Moab, I'm driving at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and a deer decides to just kill itself on the side of the truck. So it literally like a linebacker running as fast as it could right across the road. And I didn't even see it until it hit right at the driver's side
Oh my
of the
heck.
truck, and yeah, scared the crap out of me.
Yeah, I bet.
Oh, it was
I
funny.
bet. How I wonder how often that happens. You see,
I mean, they deer, especially at night, like that's one of the kind of on a 2-lane road like that road on the freeway, you're not going to do that. But in hindsight, driving at 2 o'clock in the morning on a 2-lane road in Utah is
Yeah.
probably not the best idea in the world.
Yeah. Well, I'd imagine not. I
Yeah.
mean, there's just things like that that are, I mean, really makes trucking kind of dangerous, and maybe not the deer, but just in general, being on the road all the
Yeah.
time and having that big of a, I don't know, got to be pretty stressful. And then you're always, it seems tiring to me. I don't know if it is or not.
Yeah. It's actually trucking. That's one thing most people don't really realize. The job's actually a lot harder
Yeah.
than you would think, because you think all you do is sit in a truck for 8 to 11 hours a day driving. That doesn't seem all that, it's not that physically hard. But a lot of the times, especially we do refrigerated freight.
Yeah.
So, we're delivering to warehouses that are 24/7 operations. So you may be be delivering a load at 2 o'clock in the morning and then have to get up and pick up the next load at noon the next day. And so you don't get a consistent sleep schedule. You're sleeping in a truck, and there, I don't know if you've ever been in a semi, but the ones with the sleepers are actually set up pretty nice for what they are, but it's not your bed at home.
Yeah.
Especially with a reefer running, they're loud.
Yeah. Yeah.
You've got an APU that kicks on to keep the truck warm or cool.
Yeah.
It's loud. So it's tiring that way. And then you're dealing with, a shipper, you get to somewhere where you're going to pick up a load or drop off that's supposed to take a couple hours, and they take 8 hours to do it, and it just sets you behind schedule and dealing with traffic. And so, yeah, it's a harder job than you'd think.
So did you see, in what ways did you see when you were doing that, how hard it is for the owner operators, and maybe why they were having troubles with the business? Did you think that it was pretty hard to be focused on other things when you were doing that?
Yeah, for sure. And I, it taught me a lot. Like that experience of driving for that year changed a lot of what we ended up doing in the businesses, because it gave me a lot better personal experience. I mean, you think you know a lot until you actually experience it and do it.
Yeah.
It's a completely different ball game. And so that was a really good thing. Like the fuel card that I was talking about, that came, it's a fuel card. It's more than just a fuel card. It's the fuel card that has the really good pricing. And then it's also an app that we developed to help do fuel planning and routing, to help guys easily find the best price fuel, which you'd think would be easy to do, but it's not as easy, because a lot of the times, like with these fuel cards and what different trucking companies have, they negotiate different rates with the big truck stops for fuel. And this app kind of helps tie all that together, so they don't have to, sometimes you have to be looking at one spreadsheet from one truck stop group, then look at another spreadsheet from another one, try to compare, going through 3 different states, where am I going to get my best pricing? This app kind of makes that whole process way easier. And that all came about because of the time that I spent driving.
Yeah. Well, and that's stuff that you can't learn, obviously, like you said, without doing it, without getting out there. Something I've been talking about quite a bit. There's a lot of people that are coaching right now. Coaching is becoming a very big business, and a lot of people are doing it with no knowledge of actually how to do what they're saying they know how to do, which seems weird to me. I don't understand why people would want to actually teach people how to run their business without actually having been
and they don't have
in it.
practical experience actually doing it.
Yeah. So I mean, I understand where people are, running businesses, helping other people. I mean, but actually coaching people on how to run their business, but not knowing how. And you'd be surprised how many people are doing that. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird to me.
That's one of the things that, I totally agree. And one of the things I like about, kind of some of the stuff that you're doing with Blue Collar is, I think more and more trades are becoming more and more important these days. And when I grew up, it was all about, you got to get a college education, you got to get a college degree.
Yeah.
And that's important. But I think nowadays there's such a demand for the trades that having a good base in trades is equally or more important than a college education. Now, I think it's kind of lightning in a bottle. It's something awesome if you kind of mix the two together. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what I feel like I've done. Like if
Yeah.
you can go out and become really good at a trade, but then also know how to operate a business,
Yes.
that you can make a killing, because a lot of guys just don't. They don't
Yeah.
know how to, that's what we do all the time in trucking, is we're trying to teach guys, okay, these are the best practices. These
Yeah.
are things you have to think about and you have to do. You've been using the term a lot, owner operator.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you really break that word down, owner and operator, you're doing both. You're
Yeah.
owning the business and you're operating the business. You're
Yeah.
driving, you're doing whatever, and you've got to be good at both.
Yeah, both.
And if you can be competent at both, then that's a recipe for success.
How many people, well, and as you can imagine, being an owner operator of a trucking deal is probably hard. So that's what you were doing basically for the year. What was kind of your biggest struggles there? Because that is a hard thing to mix. And it strings a lot of people out. And I mean, you talk about the not getting enough sleep, and you talk about having to do multiple jobs and wearing multiple hats. So what were kind of the biggest challenges you run across there that you ran across?
I think for me and for a lot of people,
Yeah.
I think a lot of it's you don't realize how much stress that adds.
Yeah.
You think about how much stress that you've got, you're just driving.
Mm.
And to me, I get more stressed about, like, for me, the driving piece, dealing with shippers, dealing with traffic, dealing with some of the other things is is a lot more, like, it's, to me, that's not as stressful as what happens on the business side.
Yeah.
Like, are you getting enough money to make payroll? Are you have a driver that quits on you, and now you've got a truck sitting that's not making revenue, that's got expenses. I mean, all these other stresses. I mean, you've got to get comfortable with dealing with a higher level of stress. And that's one of the things that really, like, when I started driving and all of a sudden, okay, I don't even know how to freaking slide tandems on my trailer. You add all these stresses that you aren't even thinking about. And over time, you kind of get more used to it. And something that was stressful at one point becomes not so stressful because you become good at it and used to it. But that was one of the things that was really an eye opener for me, is dealing with both sides of that owner and the operator side, and the stresses that come along with both of them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty hard. I see a lot of people that are, owner operators in businesses, not necessarily trucking, that, they get strung out. Yeah. And stressed out.
Happen.
Really easy to happen. What are the biggest things that these owner operators that don't really have the business understanding, what are the biggest things that have caught them up, and what have you done to help them out? Like, let's say, they may not know how to send out invoices properly or something. Like, what is this? What are some of the biggest things that people have run into that you saw that were frustrations that, that were the business side, that were actually the business?
So one of the things that really made me decide, okay, I actually had thought about that podcast concept for quite a few years before I actually decided to do it. And one of the things that really, like, I kept getting frustrated about with people is, you think about it, you'd have somebody that had, been driving a truck for somebody else and is maybe making, $3,000 to $5,000, or, sometimes more. Let's just say $5,000 a month in income, driving for somebody else. Well, you could essentially go out and spend that $5,000 every month, live paycheck to paycheck, and you'd probably be okay, because everything's fairly predictable. Like, you're not going to get too many surprise bills in your own personal life. And a lot of times those surprise bills aren't even, relatively speaking, that big. But what would happen as soon as guys would become owner operators, and all of a sudden they're seeing $20,000 to $25,000 a month in revenue coming in, they think they're like gobs rich all of a sudden. And so they'd go out and they'd buy their dream pickup truck. And I can't tell you how many times I'd see a client that we just kind of is making the beginning of this journey, all of a sudden pull up with this, big fancy pickup truck. and not the best business decision.
No,
And
not
so
really.
like that's one of the things that I feel like we've really focused on with
Yeah.
people is the financial discipline and understanding like your expense per mile. You know, how much does it cost to operate this truck every mile? And what do I need to make it revenue to compensate for that? And you know, depreciating an asset like a truck. How do I do that? And
Mm,
you know, just some of these other, you know, financial decisions that they've got to make. The finance side,
it's
you know,
probably the
is
biggest.
really like it's not too hard to learn how to invoice stuff.
Yeah.
You can do that, but people having the discipline to realize, okay, I've got to put some money away for a rainy day. You know, all of a sudden I've got $25,000 in my bank account, but I'm going to have to put fuel in this truck for, you know, the next
Oh,
30
yeah.
days. And, you know, you know, just all these big expenses that are coming up, and you got to put some money aside for the next truck. You got to put some money aside for a potential, you know, a big breakdown, you
Yeah.
know, things like that. And just having the discipline to be smart financially. You know, you think about the, you know, US society as a whole, like we're not very good with our personal finances
No.
at all. And that translates, most people that have bad personal financial habits are going to tend to also have bad business financial habits. And you just, in a business, you can't do that. You just
Yeah.
can't, because you're going to have a rainy day. I mean, the trucking industry, the freight market right now is horrible. It's been bad for about a year and a half. And if we hadn't saved money, like we'd be in like some serious trouble at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so finances. It's a huge deal because a lot of people, I mean, credit card debt right now is huge. I know I have heard some people get up to like $80,000 in credit card debt, which
It's
is
insane.
nuts. But it just goes down to like this impulse spending and not putting anything away for a rainy day, and like you're in your business making money and all of a sudden thinking that you can just go out and buy whatever you want
Yeah.
because it'll keep coming is the, you know, because I think we've been conditioned to think that it's going to keep coming because so many people are conditioned to go into the workforce. Not necessarily a bad thing. I mean,
Yeah.
but a lot of people are almost conditioned to do this paycheck to paycheck thing. So that's kind of hard to break out of.
It's really hard to break out of. And I mean, that's one of the, I think one of the biggest differences between people who are successful in business and people who aren't are the ones that are a little bit more disciplined on the finance side.
Mm-hmm.
Because you think about it as, you know, if you're a truck driver, um, your wage isn't going to fluctuate a whole lot,
Yeah.
even in a bad market versus a good market. Your wage isn't going to fluctuate
Yeah.
all that much. For a trucking company, it fluctuates huge. You know, a year and a half ago, we were making over $3 a mile. Um, Now we're lucky to get two,
Really.
and it's, you know, that big of a difference. I mean, that the profitability of the companies, it's huge.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when the times are good, you know, it's the whole um, David in Egypt, you know,
Yeah.
7 years of famine, seven years of feasting.
Yeah.
You've got those feast years. You've got to be smart with your money
Yeah.
and put some aside, because the famine years are going to come,
Yeah.
and you've got to have the foresight to see that as an owner.
Yeah. That's one thing I've heard my dad speak about a lot is being saving money. Cause like in concrete and construction, um, you make pretty good money spring, really in the summer and in the fall, but the winter, I mean, it's
Yeah.
especially here, you know, some people can work all year long and it's is what it is. But he learned pretty early on, you know, to put aside money for winter to be able to pay wages, but there's a lot of people that don't. And there's actually a lot of people that just don't even work in the winter because so they're, you know, their guys are on unemployment or whatever. But when and that is what it is. But when you get to a time like 2008, 2009, that completely sinks people
Yeah.
because they don't have that set aside. But I didn't know that the trucking um, per mile dollar
Yeah.
amount changes a lot.
It does. And it changes seasonality. Like the fourth quarter is usually the best. So we're kind of coming
Yeah.
into hopefully see a little bit of a bump, but it really for the last year and a half has just been falling.
tanking.
Yeah. The last 2 or 3 months, I think we've hit the bottom, and
Okay.
it's kind of flattening out.
Yeah.
But the number of trucking companies that are going out of business right now is just, it's crazy. I mean, you've probably seen in the news recently, 2 or 3 months ago, Yellow, which 30,000 trucks
Yeah.
went out of business.
Jeez.
And so and that's honestly, that's part of what's going to have to happen to make the freight rates get back to a little bit more normal. There's just too many trucks on the road right now.
Yeah. Well, so that correction in the market, it's got to be good for it then. Which sucks because you
It
don't want
sucks.
you
Yeah,
you
it
don't
sucks for
want
the
to.
guys that are going out of
Yeah.
business, but I mean, it's right now, that's what has to happen for,
Yeah.
it's the strong will survive, right?
Yeah.
That's the guys that have been smart are going to survive. The guys and gals that haven't been aren't.
Yeah. So are all those people that are out of a job, all of them be able to find, is there enough work for all of those trucks to be able to, all those people to be able to find trucks for somebody else?
Especially the good drivers. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got a lot of people now that are, it's kind of interesting in the trucking industry. Not a whole lot of young people have been wanting to
Yeah.
enter. And so you've got a lot more people retiring than you do have coming in. And so, I mean, there's been a driver shortage. I mean, trucking always has a driver shortage.
Yeah.
So it's usually not too hard for them to find a job.
Yeah. Did you, speaking of driver shortage, I mean, how long before AI starts having people drive,
That's a good
having trucks?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be
Very soon.
I don't think too soon.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got a Tesla that's got self-driving,
Yeah.
and it's pretty cool what it can do, but it's nowhere close to perfect.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of work to do, especially when you're talking about a commercial truck.
Yeah.
I think the next step, that it may be like in the 5 to 10 year range, is the truck can essentially drive itself on the freeway. So a driver can sit in the back and just rest or do whatever. And then when you have to go off the freeway, go to wherever you're actually delivering the load, then a driver's going to have to take over. 10 to 20 years, you might get to the point where they're like fully autonomous, but I think that's a ways out.
I don't know if I can see that happening. I mean, maybe, but it's a big truck being, essentially driven by, like, it's really hard to see if AI could like account for unpredictability.
There's
and like
so many
random,
variables.
there's so many. I mean, and that's the thing. People are always worried. And this is the Blue Collar Future podcast. So I actually have wanted to talk about AI more, but I don't. Kind of looking forward, like what it'll do for jobs. I don't really think AI is going to take very many jobs. Everybody thinks that it's going to take away a bunch of jobs. I don't see it replacing really any, especially not within the next 10 years. Just because there's so much development's got to come. It's really hard to think about how much thinking has to happen in the environment to really make that feasible. How many decisions have to be made that don't really fall into a specific category of, and it's a computer deciding. So that's interesting to me. I think that once they can get to a point where they could drive on the freeway, that would be a good place for ideally AI to stop.
Yeah.
There's self-driving semis on the freeway, because that would probably revolutionize the trucking.
It'll be a huge change.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I agree. Like